السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So yesterday we actually discussed the early times of Islam. It's a very big unit though, so we were not able to finish it. So today I'm just doing a quick little meeting, continuing that section, so that next week, inshallah, Brother Mahdi can go to the next topic of the series, inshallah. So yesterday we left off. We talked about how we had somebody that was told that the Prophet ﷺ was crazy, and this person was a doctor, so he wanted to go to the Prophet, and the Prophet ﷺ, he went to him and he did khutbah al-Hajj, yeah, which is Inna alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh. And before the Prophet ﷺ could even start reading Quran, he was like, stop, repeat what he just said. And then the Prophet ﷺ repeated it, and the man said, "By Allah, I have not heard anything more beautiful than this. What are you?" The Prophet ﷺ declared that he is a prophet, and this man ended up accepting Islam. That's where we left off yesterday. Now we're going to continue on this section. Just talk about pre-Islamic Arabia. Well, pre-Islamic Arabia, it was at the pinnacle of linguistic prowess, right? It was very, very like language was very important. The Arabic was very important. Poetry was very important. Even when people had news and stuff at the time to say certain things, and if they had announcement they wanted people to hear, what they would do is they would go to the Kaaba and they would announce it in a poem, or they would go to Al Safa and do the same thing, which is what the Prophet did when he publicly declared himself as the Prophet. So, anyways, at this time, it was very important. We know that poems were media at the time. So when somebody had an announcement and wanted to make something public, he would go to the Kaaba and he would recite a poem that would be depicting what he's trying to say and tell people. So, what we have here is, why is it the case? Because poetry was respected, Arabic language was very, very respected, and the poets that lived in Mecca, they were at the masters of the Arabic language, and society revolved around the use of language and poetry and all these things. And the greatest poet of them all at this time was Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira. He was the chief of the Banu Mukhzam tribe, and he was actually the father of Khalid ibn Walid, who, and a very beautiful person, very beautiful story, and inshallah, I think we'll be covering it in a future section. If not, he needs a whole like talk of his own, even a series of his own, because the Khalid ibn Walid was one of the most interesting converts of Islam in this time. So, anyways, the father of him, he was the best, probably like the best poet at all. He was the most influential and respected poet, or at least the greatest poet at this time. One time, he heard the Prophet ﷺ, reciting in front of the Kaaba, the Quran, and this is the first time he had a chance to properly listen and hear the Quran Kareem. And he finally had a chance, and he was mesmerized. He was stopped in his tracks, like from listening to this. And until the Prophet ﷺ finished, and then he muttered a statement of prose which spread like wildfire. So he said something after hearing the Quran from the Prophet. He said something that spread like wildfire. And I'm going to read it verbatim from the book. By Allah, there is no one amongst you more knowledgeable in poetry than me. Neither the mitr of Rajas, nor the form of al qasida, which is or the poetry of the jinn. By Allah, what he is saying does not resemble any of these. And by Allah, the speech he mutters has a certain sweetness and charm. The upper part is fruitful, and the lower part is well watered and abundant. It supersedes, and nothing supersedes it, and it crushes whatever is beneath it. The people of Mecca began to panic. Okay, they heard him say this. This is the best poet, and he's giving high praise to the Quran that the Prophet ﷺ had recited. They start panicking, and the greatest poet of Mecca, who was a pagan, he was not Muslim, he was nothing like that. He's a pagan, and he just basically admitted defeat after hearing a single recitation of the Quran. And when Abu Jahl heard this, he wanted to rectify the situation. So he said to Al-Walid, "Your people have heard that you have praised the Quran, and they will not be satisfied with you until you disassociate with Muhammad and speak out against the Quran." Now, unlike Abu Talib, who was like, Abu Talib he was firm. He was not. You could not just easily push him to abandon the Prophet ﷺ. No, the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Talib helped him a lot, and he was like firm. He was not. However, this person, Al Walid, He was more like a politician, right? So he kind of is like, okay, yeah, okay, just tell me what to say, right? He literally just said, tell me what to say. And Abu Jahl said, call him a madman. Then Walid said, but everyone knows he's not a madman. He doesn't exhibit, he does not exhibit any symptoms of a crazy person. Then Abu Jahl said, okay, so call him a fortune teller. And then he says, but he's not a fortune teller. He does not have their vernacular nor their style. And Abu Jahl said, call him a magician. You could say he's a magician. Once again, Mughira said, but he is not a magician. He does not have their invocations or tricks. And Abu Jahl said, call him a poet. And then Mughira said, by Allah, I am the best poet amongst you. None of you can compete with me. And I am saying that this is not poetry. Abu Jahl persisted, demanding, you must say something. We will not be satisfied with you until you do. And Mughira said, he then asked, look, leave me alone for a few days to think of a solution. Now, subhanAllah, what happened after this? He was trying to think of a solution. He was very exasperated, and he finally came up with an idea. However, right before he had the chance to say his idea that he finally came up with after thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, Allah sent down verses of the Quran articulating with a like very, very good accuracy his exact thoughts and his feelings and his ideas and even his facial expressions. Where it says in the Quran, and leave to me the one I created all by myself, and granted him abundant wealth and children always by his side, and made life very easy for him. Yet he's hungry for more. But no, he has truly been stubborn with our revelations. I will make his fate unbearable, for he contemplated and determined, like a degrading table for the Quran. May he be condemned. How evil was his determination? May he be condemned even more. How evil was his determination? Then he recontemplated in frustration, then frowned and scowled, then turned his back on the truth and acted arrogantly, saying, this Quran is nothing but magic from the ancients. This is no more than the word of a man. Soon I will burn him in hell. And what will make you realize what hell is? It does not let anyone live or die, scorching the skin. This is the Quran. It was revealed right when he was about to say, basically, he was gonna like say something wrong. He was gonna say something about the Prophet that's not true, or like say, basically find a way to retract what he said before. He was thinking, thinking, and thinking. He came up with an idea, and Allah revealed this Quran, these verses, where it basically says, it's one of the most powerful verses in the Quran, by the way. This is one of the most powerful verses of the Quran. He sends it down in response to a Walid, and yeah, it scared him. Like first of all, it's only befitting for Allah to send down one of the most powerful verses in the Quran. And in his response, this guy who died a pagan, despite both of his children eventually accepting Islam, especially Khalid ibn Walid, uh, and subhanallah, like imagine Allah reveals these ayahs, like articulating what you're thinking, and like subhanallah, it's another example that we kind of discussed yesterday. How Abu Talib, yeah, he did not accept Islam, but he was like, yeah, like the Prophet tried and tried and tried to accept Islam, but he did not accept Islam. It shows that if Allah does not want somebody to be guided, they will not be guided. And this is another example here. Yeah, in Walid, he has this articulation of what he's thinking, and I feel like anyone who's unbiased and you know, I find it very hard to understand how someone can hear these verses being taken down and does not convert to Islam. He did not convert. He died a pagan, but it's alhamdulillah his kids did convert to Islam. So then Quraysh should also challenge the Prophet. They told him to do a miracle, and this happened many, many times. An example is Surah Al-Isra. We have an example where it says, they challenge, we will never believe you until you cause a spring to gush forth from the earth for us, or until you miraculously produce a garden of palm trees and vineyards, and cause rivers to flow abundantly in it, or cause the sky to fall upon us in pieces, as you have claimed, or bring Allah and the angels before us face to face, or until you have a house of gold, or you ascend into the heaven, and even then we will not believe in your ascension until you bring down to us a book that we can read. Say, glory be to my Lord. Am I not only a human messenger? Now, Allah could have easily made all of these things. He could have done all of these things. He could have house of gold, all of these things Allah could have easily done. But he did not do it. And you know why he didn't do it? It's because he revealed already the biggest miracle of all. It's the Quran. The Quran is the biggest miracle already. And also, they're demanding miracles out of arrogance. Even Allah said, even if we had sent them angels, made the dead speak to them, and assembled, before their very eyes, every sign they demanded, they would still not have believed. They still would not have believed unless Allah so willed. But most of them are ignorant. Previous nations, such as Ad and Thamud, indeed refused to accept the truth, even after being shown miracles. Nothing keeps us. And of course, we know that the previous nations, such as the likes of Ad and we know the previous nations, the likes of Thamud, they indeed they refused to accept the truth even after being shown miracles. And so it would not have changed anything. So Allah's infinite wisdom. I mean, and that's an example of it right here. So that's what we have about this. Now moving on to another topic that we did not discuss yesterday was bribery and torture. Uh, there's a lot that can be said about this. Plenty of it in the book that I am referencing right now. But I'm just going to mention that a few examples. So we have the Quraysh. We know that they tried to negotiate with the Prophet ﷺ, and they're like saying, what do we share? We do one day people worship Allah alone, and then another day people worship the idols. And of course, you cannot do compromise. Like that doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. Okay, that's literally shirk. Like you can't even if you do one day of worshiping Allah, praying 5 times a day, and then the other day you go and do shirk to idols. I mean, that's you are doing shirk. And of course, yeah, this is not acceptable compromise. And even Allah revealed in Surah Al-Kafirun, say, "Oh, you disbelievers, I do not worship what you worship, nor do you worship what I worship. I will never worship what you worship, nor will you ever worship what I worship. You have your way, and I have my way. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ." So, as previously mentioned, the Quraysh did worship Allah, and yet the Allah instructs the Prophet to say, "I do not worship what you worship," because worshiping Allah through like intermediaries, like I said, is shirk. Okay, shirk. If you try to worship Allah through a stone statue or whatever, that is shirk. Polytheism is haram. One of the biggest sins. So it's nullifies the whole worship in entirety. But then the Quraysh asked the Prophet, what did he want in order to stop? They tried to offer him money. Even the Quraysh asked him, what do you want in order to cease? The Prophet replied, I want one statement. Like he said, he wanted one statement from them, to which Abu Jahl replied, ecstatically. He said, we will give you 10. So the Prophet said, like just to recap, the reader is the Prophet said he wanted one statement from them, and Abu Jahl said, we will give you 10. And then he tells, okay, uh, the statement I want is the Islamic declaration. It's La ilaha illallah, and there's no God but Allah. And they responded as described by Allah in the Quran. It says, has He reduced all gods to one God? Indeed, this is something totally astonishing. So, of course, the statement they did not make. They did not want to do that. So then, of course, the offers of compromise failed. Quraysh tried to do bribery, so they asked a distant uncle of the Prophet to bribe him. He said, "Oh, my nephew, you know your lineage and your status. You are the grandson of Abdul Muttalib, and you are the son of Abdullah. You have come forward with a matter that has wreaked havoc on our people. Oh, Muhammad, are you better than Abdul Muttalib? Are you better than Abdullah?" The Prophet, in his wisdom, he did not answer them. These are loaded rhetorical questions. He did not answer them. Uh, so then he continued. He said, we have never seen a young man as promising as you flip around so suddenly and bring so much harm to our people. The Arab are mocking us. You are creating disunity, and we are on the precipice of civil war. We have a number of suggestions that may interest you. If you are interested in money, I have the power of the Quraysh vested in me to offer you more money than any of us have, and you shall be the richest Arab. If you want power, we will make you our king. And if you want women, choose any woman that you want, and we will ensure that she marries you. If you think you are ill, we will hire a doctor to cure you. And of course, embodying true wisdom and respect for all these things. The Prophet, he waited for him to finish, and then he replied, "Are you done, oh Abu Walid?" And this is his uncle, and he said, "Yes." Like an affirmative, he replied in the affirmative. He was done. Then the Prophet, he said, "Now listen to me." Then he started reciting, uh, I seek refuge in Allah. So, Bismillah. He said, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim." And then he started, Hameen. And then the surah basically, we don't have enough time to read all of it. But essentially, this is the revelation from the most compassionate, the most merciful. It is a book whose verses are perfectly explained, a Quran in Arabic for people who know, delivering good news and warning. And of course, he recites quite a few verses. And then, of course, before this conversation, like most of Quraysh, his uncle, he did not actually listen to the Quran with intent. He did not actually like intentionally listen to the Quran. But now, after hearing these verses, the Prophet himself recited, while he was hearing these verses, his expression began to change. The power of the recitation and tempo started to intensify, and until it rose to like a crescendo with the verse, "If they turn away, then say, I warn you of a mighty blast like the one that befell Ad and Thamud." Okay, so at this point, he could not take it any longer, and he put his hands on the on the mouth of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, "I beg you by Allah and by the right I have over you as a blood relative, stop and not to send this punishment." So he was already against, like he was not even like Muslim or anything against it, telling him to stop. He hears these verses, he's like, "Okay, okay, stop, stop, stop. I don't want this punishment. Like I can't." And then he returned and went back to Quraysh, where he came and he said, "Look, listen to me. Leave this man alone because I have heard a speech from him which I have never heard before. I could not comprehend all of it, but he will hold importance in the world. If the Arabs get rid of him for us, our hands are clean. But if he is victorious over the Arab, then by Allah, his victory is our victory and his power is our power." And Quraysh was like, of course, they're dismissive once again. They're like, "Okay, well, he has bewitched you like he has bewitched everybody else." So they did not listen to him. But he saw, right? So then, then the Quraysh went to basically, they went to the Jews and the Christians because they kind of retained their history of prophethood from before. There are a lot of pagans in this time, but the Jews and the Christians, they know their prophet history. They're Ahl Kitab. So they went to them, the two of the worst of the Quraysh, two of the worst people in Quraysh. They went to them. They went to the Jews in Medina, and they asked for ways to quiz and catch out the prophet. So one instruction was to ask him about the prophet Ishaq and Yaqub and Yusuf, particularly what happened to the family of Yaqub. Quraysh asked the Prophet, والسلام, Allah revealed the entirety of Surah Yusuf. Like, Ahsan al-Qasas, it's the best of stories. Very beautiful surah was revealed. And then, another occasion, they instructed the Quraysh to ask the Prophet three questions, adding, "No one will know the answers of these three questions except a true Prophet." The three questions were what? The first one was, ask him about the young man who slept in the cave and slept a long time. The second question was, ask him about the man who traveled the world from east to west, whose experiences are now legends. And then the third question was, ask him about the ruh, the soul. Where does it come from? The Prophet confidently responded, "Alayhi I will inform you of what you have asked about tomorrow." However, he forgot to say inshallah. So because he did not say inshallah, if Allah wills, the revelation did not descend the next day, and it actually came after 2 weeks. The Quraysh started to mock the Prophet when it did not come the following day as promised. They were provoking. They were saying, "Muhammad promised us that he would inform us the next day. 2 weeks have passed, and he has not informed anything." And Allah reminded the Prophet and the believers at the same time, uh, as to the relationship between Allah and His slave, right? Allah is the one who plans in His infinite wisdom, right? So you can't say anything's going to happen without saying inshallah. I can't say I'm going to LA tomorrow to pick up something. No, inshallah you are. You're not going to do anything without Allah's will. Okay, it's not possible. I'm not going to go, oh, I'm going to go visit my family. Inshallah, you have to say inshallah. So it's a wisdom. This is a wisdom that we can actually take right now and realize to ourselves. Say inshallah, if you're going to say something, say, oh, yeah, if Allah wills. Allah wants it to happen, of course, then it will happen. So of course it did come down eventually, and it's actually very beautiful what happened. So let's go into this next page. So Allah revealed the verses of the Quran as a response to the questions, and details of the Ahl Kahf that even the Jews did not know were revealed. Okay. Similarly, Allah identifies the man with the famous expeditions as the Dua al-Qarnayn. This is also in Surah Kahf. The Prophet also talks about him. And then for the Ruh, the Prophet Allah maintained that it is one of the mysteries of the knowledge that the human beings on earth will never ever know. So they ask you about the Ruh. The Quran says this. Uh, they ask you about the Ruh. Say its nature is known only to my Lord, and you, O humanity, have been given but little knowledge. So what happened here, actually, is he asked about their soul, and basically it was a trick question because they knew the Jews knew that it was you do not know about it. They don't know the answer because it's not something that we as humans know. So the Prophet couldn't answer it. He said, this is not something. This is Allah's knowledge. This is not something that people on earth are going to ever know. And they're like, okay. So he answered the first question properly. He answered the second question properly, and he also answered the third one properly, even though it was a trick question. So if he had answered it, we would have been able to expose him. But what he just said is true. I mean, maybe he can't know, but that's the answer. So he answered these questions properly, and of course, Quraysh failed. It was an epic fail when they were trying to expose him. They were wrong. And of course, if anything, like it increases faith. At least us, even like we look at this, it increases our faith. It's like, okay, they tried to ask three questions. He answered all of them, including the trick question, properly. It was a bit to expose the Prophet, that third question, and they failed. So, after that, they started to, Quraysh started to torture the believers. They began to torture them. So, you know, they tried to torture them in many different ways. Abu Bakr was, of course, the first group of seven people that embraced Islam were Abu Bakr, Ammar, Sumayya, Suhaib, Bilal, and Al-Miqdad. And the thing is, even like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he mentioned that as for the Prophet, Islam, Allah protected him through his uncle. As for Abu Bakr, Allah protected him through his own tribe, the Banu Quhafa. As for the remainder, the Quraysh rounded them up and began torturing them. And then there's a lot of descriptions about how they would take burning iron and place it on their bodies until they complied. And really, they would just torture and torture and torture and torture the Muslims. One example is Bilal's master. He was one of the worst culprits of the Quraysh. Is Umayyah ibn Khalaf. They participated in this torture, right? It was worth noting that the slaves were expensive to buy and own. So if you harm your own slave, you're kind of hurting yourself, right? I mean, imagine you buy a slave, it's expensive, and you have him doing all this work for you and stuff. You don't want to hurt him because that just makes it harder for him to do his job that you bought him for. Which of course, this is wrong. But what happened is they tortured them. They knew it was wrong, and they knew that it was actually hurting themselves. But their hate for Islam was so strong that they did it anyways. They're hurting the slave, and they're also in turn hurting themselves because their slave being hurt meant that they could do less work. It was not the same. So they're risky. It was a very strong hatred that they had, and it just shows the animosity that they had towards Islam and Muslims. Umayyah would personally take Bilal into the desert and put a massive rock on his chest and leave him in the sun for the entirety of the day. So that was very, very brutal. And even like some of the rocks that they would use, like they were hard enough to cook meat on, or they would uh you'd able to do things like that. Like the meat would be cooked on it. Yeah. So of course Bilal would you keep rejecting. I reject these gods that you want me to these fake gods that you want me to worship. And he kept rejecting. And then of course his honor and reward matched his struggles as the Prophet ﷺ appointed him as the Mu'addin. He was the one who did the Adhan in Mecca. He would be the one who did it. And of course, his reputation and prestige withstood the 1400 years of Islamic history. We all remember Bilal. We all know Bilal. People name their kids Bilal still. And he was very brave and forbearing, and he had unwavering belief in Allah. It's like forbearing in his belief in Allah. So, and even in the Quran it says in Rahman, هل جزاء الإحسان إلا الإحسان? Is there any reward for goodness except goodness? Look how Allah has rewarded the Bilal after this torture he went through. And of course, there are many other examples. Like another example is Khabbab ibn al-Arat. He was one of the first 10 people to embrace Islam. He was an Arab slave of Yemeni origin, and he had a female master, Anmar. When she found out he embraced Islam, she hired him off to beat him up so badly that he lost consciousness, and he woke up in a pool of blood. And then even sometimes she would partake in his torture and hold a piece of burning iron against his back. And the Prophet ﷺ was pained by his state that so pained by it that he made a dua for him that oh Allah, please help Khabbab against his enemy. And a few days later, his owner woke up in a rabid state of psychosis, and the doctors prescribed her with some kind of thing, is where they basically like close the wounds with by burning it basically, and then that ended up killing her. So she died after the dua. The Prophet made dua that he would be helped against his enemy, and Allah, she died. He killed her. Allah killed her. So, of course, even the Prophet, ﷺ, he once said, "No one may punish with fire except the Lord of fire." Allah even decreed for the justice that her demise was via a painful bout of cauterization, which is like what they burn her basically. So it was justice. There are many other examples. Even Yasir and Sumayya and their son Ammar, uh, uh, who were also tortured. They were tortured in front of each other, which is like two levels of torture. It's like psychological torture and physical torture. And yeah, it was, of course, they were tortured as well. And it's very like it's very hard to read about this because these are early Muslims, and they would still not they would not, you know, forget Allah, and they would not renounce him. They would not even fakely, right? Ammar ended up just saying it, like just so he would stop being tortured. Ammar, because he was young, he said he would renounce Allah, or actually, if I want to read it properly, uh, what Ammar said is he could not bear the pain any longer. He succumbed to Abu Jahl's demands and outwardly renounced his faith. That's what he did. And then he went to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, like he was panicking. He's like, or like, even though he didn't mean it, he just wanted to stop being tortured. He renounced his faith. He said, "O Messenger of Allah, I have uttered the words of kufr." The Prophet ﷺ said, "How do you find your faith in your heart?" He replied, "It as it always was. It was always as strong as it always was." And his words did not depict what was in his heart. And the Prophet reassured him that he had no blame, and he was permitted to repeat those words if he were tortured again. And yeah, his iman was very beautiful, Ammar, by the way. Even the Prophet ﷺ said his iman has been filled in his heart all the way to his neck, meaning his faith is overflowing. So that was the story of those. His parents were killed, unfortunately. His father was killed in front of him, I believe. Uh, yeah, his father was brutally killed, and he was the first martyr of Islam, Yasir. And then his mother, Sumayya, she she grew enraged and she rebuked Abu Jahl, and then he, out of anger, he brutally killed her too. So Ammar, he had at that point he renounced it, but fakely renounced it. He just said it will stop, and then the Prophet said it's actually fine because you didn't mean it, and in your heart you still believe in Allah. You just said that so they'll stop torturing you. So there are other tales of torture that has happened, but at the end of the day, we know that these people were tortured, but they still stood strong on their faith. They still worship Allah. They still were the forerunners of Islam. They were one the four people, like they were like pioneers at the time because they were the Sahaba, and they joined this new religion knowing that it's the truth, and Allah rewarded them. Inshallah, they'll all be in the Jannah. We'll see them all in Jannah, Bismillah. But it's just very beautiful and difficult to read about them because they were tortured. It was not easy for them. For us, maybe in the first world, in America, for example, as Muslims, we just be Muslims. We go to the masjid, we do things without persecution. But there are places in the world where that's not the case. And even in this specific time period, the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where it was not the case, it was very difficult to be a Muslim, and you can be tortured for it. And yeah, it's very tough. But Alhamdulillah, we'll be able to move on from this section now because things get better for Islam. And as we will learn next week, when we go into the section of immigration to Abyssinia, at that point things were so bad they had to go to Abyssinia. And Brother Mahdi will be doing that lecture, inshallah. Sorry if this was a little bit long. It was a lot of content, and I did not go over everything in detail. But inshallah, we were able to get the gist of early Islam. And inshallah, next week, like I mentioned, we will be doing the immigration to Abyssinia. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.